Today, we will discuss the human immune system response to the human immunodeficiency virus, or HIV for short. Before we discuss the immune system response, we must first look at the pathogen itself. HIV is a retrovirus, meaning it contains and uses reverse transcriptase to change its RNA genome into DNA to integrate its genome into the cell's genome. HIV can cause disease through a combination of two different cycles, the lysogenic and the lytic cycle. Let's look at them one at a time. In the lysogenic cycle, HIV targets the CD4 cells and integrates its genetic material into the genome of the host cell. Here, it stays in a dormant phase as a provirus. In this dormant phase, the person who has contracted this virus will not feel any different, as there will be no symptoms. When the conditions are favorable, the lytic cycle is then induced, and the provirus is activated. Once the provirus is activated, it then replicates, creating a large amount of the virus. Due to the large amounts of virus, the cell then lyse, and these viruses go on to infect other CD4 cells. Because CD4 cells, also known as helper T cells, work by recognizing antigens and activating cells to go fight the pathogen, a decrease in functional CD4 cells stop the immune system from being able to recognize pathogens and antigens. HIV can also infect and kill macrophages and dendritic cells, but much less than CD4 cells. Without an immune system with the ability to recognize infection, people with HIV are incredibly susceptible to opportunistic infections and other complications. Hence, why people do not die from HIV, they die from a different disease complicated by HIV. Now that we know the basics of the structure of the HIV pathogen and the way it infects cells, let's look at the immune system's response to this virus. Innate immune response. HIV cannot penetrate unbroken skin, which is a physical barrier, but it's transmitted through direct exchange of bodily fluids. Macrophages and dendritic cells can engulf HIV particles and present their antigens to influence natural killer cells to kill HIV viruses on recognition. HIV infection does cause an inflammatory response, causing immune cells to the site of the infection. When cells are infected with HIV, they can put out interferons to activate other immune cells and help stop the spread of the virus. HIV can cause chronic immune system activation, which essentially leads to the immune system being too tired to fight off infection, called immune dysfunction, and stops the immune system from being able to recognize and fight off known pathogens, which helps the diseases progress. Primary response by adaptive immunity. B cells recognize the surface proteins on HIV viruses and are able to produce antibodies to fight against the virus. But because HIV mutates rapidly, this is not always effective or not completely so, allowing certain HIV viruses to multiply and create a full-blown infection. Usually, T cells would recognize HIV and influence other immune cells' ability to fight off an infection. However, when HIV targets these cells and kills them before they are able to expel interferons, the signal to kill viruses with a specific surface protein does not get passed to other cells like the B cells and cytotoxic T cells. Cytotoxic cells kill cells that are already infected with HIV by recognizing viral antigens displayed on the surfaces of infected cells. However, HIV viruses have evolved to downgrade the MHC class I molecules that present the viral antigens to the cytotoxic cells in the first place. If a person is able to fight off an HIV infection upon their first exposure, they develop memory B and T cells that create a much higher and more efficient response to the virus upon a second exposure. However, HIV rapidly evolves and mutates, which can change the surface proteins of the virus, limiting the capacity of the memory cells to recognize it. Secondary response. People who have a secondary response for HIV are people who have fought off the infection fully after their primary exposure, because once a person has HIV, they have it for life. The second response to an HIV exposure would be much stronger and more efficient than the primary response due to the presence of memory B cells, which would rapidly differentiate into plasma cells and produce high amounts of antibodies that specifically target HIV and memory T cells, either CD4, which tell other cells to attack HIV and cytotoxic cells, which directly attack the virus. The antibodies produced by the memory B cells are much more specific and much stronger, so they are much more effective at targeting and killing HIV viruses before they can infect cells. Memory cytotoxic cells also target HIV particles in infected cells at higher efficiency than the primary response, reducing viral replication and spread beyond infection. Treatment. In terms of finality and absolution, there is no cure, vaccine, or 100% effective prevention measure against HIV. However, cures and vaccines are of high priority to the CDC, and semi-effective prevention measures exist, including medications like PrEP and PEP, and regulation measures that prevent HIV from developing into AIDS, such as ART. ART stands for antiretroviral therapy and works by taking many different medications that block proteins that infected cells need to create more provirus. PrEP helps to prevent a person from contracting HIV in case of a future accidental exposure. PrEP can have a similar effect to a vaccine but does not work the same way. PrEP essentially means taking ART drugs before an exposure to block reverse transcriptase from replicating viral DNA. But this does not stimulate an immune response or train the immune system on how to react to an exposure. PEP is for people who have recently been exposed to HIV and works by taking ART drugs for the prescribed amount of time to prevent HIV from developing a strong infection and replicating beyond saving. Because the body has had an exposure to HIV, but assuming PEP has been taken to prevent it from replicating, the secondary immune response is likely to be effective in the case of a second exposure. Thank you for watching our video.